I promise not to repeat too much of what Tariq said, but I thought it might be fun, for me anyway, to read a very brief excerpt of the introduction to the Italian version of You Might Be President. But it wouldn't be much fun for you if I read it in Italian, would it? So I'm going to read it in English. And this way I make sure that I make the central point of my analysis of Obama, and I'll elaborate a little bit after I finish. But if you just indulge me for a second, it goes like this. Barack Obama swept into the White House in January 2009, still floating, or so it appeared to millions of his admirers, high above the crude realities of contemporary American political life. Old-fashioned landmarks, party loyalty, ideology, campaign fundraising, patronage, corruption, even race, seemed hopelessly outdated as points of reference for understanding what was trumpeted as a new phenomenon in the nation's civic history. Post-racial was perhaps the most common term used in describing the new Obama administration, but the president's supporters might just as well have called it post-political. Indeed, Obama's pleas for nonpartisan cooperation on the great crises of the day were so insistent that at times one could almost forget he was the product of the Democratic Party and its most ferociously partisan local chapter, the Democratic machine of Cook County, Illinois. Now, such credulousness and hero worship were understandable, if not advisable, in the months between Obama's election and his inauguration. Demoralized by 8 years of George W. Bush's bellicose stupidity and frightened by the near collapse of the financial system, Americans were relieved to have as their leader one so seemingly cool, collected, and articulate. Obama may have been seen initially as having a transforming agenda, but the soothing calmness and clarity of his speech quickly made clear that he was on the same level as his two most rhetorically accomplished recent predecessors, Ronald Reagan, It's Morning in America, and William Jefferson Clinton, I know you voted for change, and I feel your pain. Uttered by the unconventionally named Obama, slogans such as change you can believe in, yes we can, and the audacity of hope served as reassuring evidence that Obama was no radical. To be sure, he was not, but a great many people sincerely hoped he was at least a reformer, that he might do more than just rearrange the furniture. Almost immediately, however, the president-elect exhibited a distinct preference for the status quo in political decor. His first major appointment to the powerful post of White House Chief of Staff was of Rahm Emanuel, a veteran party functionary whose links to the Clintons and Chicago Mayor Richard M. Daley had made him a dangerous and feared force within the Democratic camp. Emanuel had risen to prominence in the Clinton administration as a lead lobbyist for the passage of the anti-labor North American Free Trade Agreement, a bitterly contested battle that split the Democratic Party and exemplified President Clinton's drive to raise more campaign money from corporations and Wall Street. Emanuel's ascension demonstrated more than anything else that an Obama administration would follow the corrupted rules and protocols dictated by Congress and Washington's most powerful lobbyists. Reinforcing the status quo tenor of the new administration, Emanuel's arrival at the White House coincided more or less with a departure, no doubt engineered by Emanuel, of Emanuel's chief political rival during the 2008 political campaign, Democratic National Committee Chairman Howard Dean. Dean had frightened the party's establishment with his aggressively populist run for president in 2004 and his strident declarations against Democratic acceptance of the Iraq invasion, as well as the corruption of Congress by private interests, were still offensive to a Democratic leadership that was more than happy to accommodate lobbyists and military interventionists from both parties. Symbolically, the appointment of Robert Gibbs as the president's press secretary perfectly foretold the future of reform within the Democratic Party. Gibbs had been the spokesman for the Democratic 527 group that had done the most in 2003-2004 to derail Dean's reform campaign by running scurrilous attacks against him. Now, the reason I read that is because I want to underline and accentuate the idea or the understanding that Barack Obama is a Democratic Party man. He's a product of the local machine in Chicago. That's where he learned how to do politics. He is unfailingly respectful of the prerogatives of committee chairmen within his party because they have seniority on the one hand, and they are big fundraisers on the other hand. And Rahm Emanuel is in place, along with a couple of other key people like Valerie Jarrett, to absolutely ensure that Barack Obama maintains or hews to the line of party discipline when it comes to fundraising. When it comes to legislation, of course, as you saw, it's very decentralized to the extent that he's happy to let Max Baucus write the healthcare reform, the healthcare bill, and he's happy to see the money continue to come in for the National Campaign Committee. Now, Francis asked me earlier why Max Baucus would write the healthcare bill coming from an empty state with very little of anything. And I have talked to people who worked in the Johnson administration who have said to me, the idea that Lyndon Johnson would turn a major piece of legislation over to Max Baucus is just unbelievable. It never could have happened. He would have presented Baucus with the bill and said, Max, my friend, if you ever want to see another dam built in this state, or you want to have an unopposed primary campaign next time around, you will do exactly what I tell you, and you will put this thing into the pipeline the way I tell you to do it. And that's something I'd like to get into a little bit later about why Obama is so unlike somebody like Lyndon Johnson. But anyway, I answered the reason Max Baucus wrote the bill with the able assistance of Liz Fowler, the former lobbyist for WellPoint Insurance, is because they wanted him to write it. That's the way the system works. That's the way the fundraising racket works. And to do otherwise would be to jeopardize not only everybody's status at the level just below Obama, chief of staff level, high cabinet position levels, but maybe even Obama's presidency and his ability to get reelected. Jimmy Carter was the last reform president we had, and you saw what his party did to him. They chopped him up into little pieces and weakened him so that Reagan could beat him. And this is the way party politics works. So I hope we can talk a little bit about the Democratic Party itself. I don't have any great insights into Barack Obama's character. I'm more interested in understanding how the party functions around him or with him. I remember before my book came out in France a couple years ago, L'Express, the weekly magazine, had a cover story that said, "Can Barack Obama reform America?" And I remember saying on a radio show, the question you should be asking is, can Barack Obama, or is Barack Obama interested in reforming the Democratic Party? And the answer is a resounding no. He's a go-along, get-along politician who seems to be enjoying himself immensely as president, and he's not interested in making waves, because if he makes waves, he doesn't want to turn into Jimmy Carter.